ES Audio.
Hello, I'm Nick Curtis.
I'm Nick Clark.
Coming up on this week's show, we review Crazy for You at the Gillian Lynne Theatre. Direction and choreography for this show is by multi-Tony and Olivier Award-winning Susan Stroman.
And we discuss A Strange Loop.
You're running around there with an NFA, so now you're gonna write me a gospel play. Ooh, like Tyler Perry! Tyler Perry writes real life.
A musical by Michael R. Jackson. Directed by Stephen Brackett. That's on at the Barbican Theatre. Our interview this week is with Cherrelle Skeete, star of Amazon original Hannah and the stage production Harry Potter and the Cursed Child.
The very early magic tricks that we created was in our devising process, the movement we got to make, carrying people on our backs to kind of figure out how we can lift people, like being in harnesses and flying.
Cherrelle is currently performing in Beneatha's place at the Young Vic. That's written and directed by Kwame Kwei-Armah.
Welcome back to the Evening Standard Theatre podcast.
Nick, you've just come back from a break and now Nancy's off.
Yep, over in the States, I know. She's living it up in upstate New York, I believe. I'm just back from Denmark, where I've been having a lovely Scandinavian time. So
obviously, Elsinore.
Yeah,
high
well,
on the...
I have been to Elsinore before, which is very impressive and very atmospheric as a castle.
Do you really get the Hamlet vibes?
You do get the Hamlet vibes. When they're on a really snowy day where there was icicles hanging off the battlements and things, and so you really got the sense of that opening scene of the two soldiers sort of isolated up on the battlements. I didn't do any lines from Hamlet there, though I have done some lines from
Must
Hamlet.
have been tempted.
I did them at the great amphitheatre of Epidaurus once. Visited there early in the morning.
In terms of theatrical name dropping, this clang, clang,
it
right
was
here.
just
okay.
me and my wife there and two American tourists, and this American woman shouted at me, "Say something!" So I did a little bit of To Be or Not To Be, which did give me a bit of a shiver up the spine, I have to say. Anyway, none of that on today's programme.
No, indeed.
Meanwhile, there have been numerous things in the news this week. The big news in theatre this week, and I was surprised by quite how big it was, is that comedian Stuart Lee is going to be rewriting the Porter scene. He's going to be rewriting Shakespeare, yes. Let's face it, he's been crying out for a bit of script doctoring and a few new gags for centuries. Again, I'm slightly surprised about this. I've seen Shakespeare tinkered with in many, many ways, and I agree the Porter scene in Macbeth is probably one of the ones where the jokes work least well. But it's a tiny, tiny fraction of
there
the
can
play.
Surely be no outrage here. No. Shakespeare's been chopped up, rewritten, and he's managed to survive it all.
Yeah, it's true. As I think we were discussing earlier, I once saw a production of Hamlet where the gravedigger scene was reimagined as a rap, which ended with the words, "and now I'm going to necrophilia," which is possibly the least tasteful thing I've ever seen in a Shakespeare play. But
every single Shakespeare production has a cut of some sort. Some scenes are taken out. Inevitably they're not rewritten as such, but every now and again I would say they're sort of edited for clarity.
There are some, yes, and there are some rewrites and some, or some tweaks sometimes, or little things snipped out. Shakespeare's Globe put on their Twitter account this week asking people what their favourite line was in Shakespeare, and mine is "his knell is gnawed," which is always cut out of Macbeth. It's old Seward's line about his son dying, but
oh wow!
I think there's something really nice about his knell is gnawed.
His knell is gnawed.
There you go.
Yeah.
But that one quite often doesn't make the cut. So I guess if this makes the Porter scene live again, then good. But the other big news is Cabaret is going to Broadway.
Well, we thought it might happen, but the longer it dragged on, you thought, well, where's it going to go? But they found a theatre for it, the August Wilson Theatre. Yeah. Opening spring 2024. It feels like a no-brainer to me. It's such an incredible show over here.
Absolutely.
You'd imagine it translated over to Broadway. I can't see why not.
Yeah.
But
so this is Rebecca Frecknell's production,
right.
we should say, that's been running at the Playhouse, which has been transformed into the Kit Kat Club, I guess.
By Tom Scott, who is also designing out there as well.
Absolutely. And I guess, you need to find a theatre which you can do the same sort of do-over with. But amazing news. Rebecca Frecknell is just having an incredible year, isn't she? With Streetcar Named Desire and whatever her other
Juliet. Romeo and Juliet.
Romeo and Juliet.
Just talk about Shakespeare, that guy Shakespeare. I wonder if they're going to go real star casting. Obviously, it opened with Eddie Redmayne and Jessie Buckley, and it had a succession of fairly big names. And so I wonder who America might have up their sleeve for the opening.
Yes, indeed. I think they came up with a really interesting and quite smart casting model here, where basically you've got really interesting names signing up for 3-month runs rather than the average sort of 6 months to a year, which I think means you do get biggish names who are prepared to invest that amount of time in a show where a year would be, invidious to their TV or film career.
Yeah, and it's one of these legendary shows that people want to be in.
Yeah,
as well.
yeah. It's a weird sort of repetition of the arc of the famous Donmar production, which had Alan Cumming in it and went to Broadway, which of course that dominated the whole sort of view of cabaret for years, even though because it was at the Donmar, which has only just over 200 seats, hardly anybody saw it. It was here for a month, then it went to New York, but for years that was the definitive cabaret. This one, Rebecca Frecknell's one, even though there have been some issues about whether it's extremely expensive, but you can get into it more cheaply than the top price tickets, and many, many more people will have seen this one than would have seen that milestone Donmar one. Yeah. So good for her, amazing work, Rebecca Frecknell.
Good for the good people of America. We'll get to see a really, really excellent production.
Absolutely.
Right, should we get into our first review?
Yep, let's do that.
This is Crazy for You at the Gillian Inn Theatre.
So, Crazy for You is a weird sort of hybrid in that it's effectively a 1930s musical that didn't really exist in its current form until 1992. It's based on a George and Ira Gershwin film musical from 1930 called Girl Crazy. The producers of this have lifted the songs from that. They've got a new book, a new story written for it by Ken Ludwig, and they've pulled in Gershwin songs from lots of other movies and lots of other sources over the years. So you've basically got a sort of tailor-made greatest hits package with a story written around it.
And of course, Susan Stroman choreographed it in 92, and now she's choreographing and directing. Did she direct it then as well?
No, it was directed by Mike Ockrent, the great British director who is no longer with us, but they rather sweetly paid tribute to him. Susan Stroman came on stage on press night and paid tribute to Mike Ockrent, and there are, if you look carefully at it, there are a few nods to him around the set. There's an advert for Ockrent's 20% proof whiskey on one of the saloon bar doors. But yeah, this is a sort of classic piece of 1930s entertainment, I would say.
I mean, the story essentially is this theatre-mad Bobby who's basically torn between wanting to dance, wanting this career in showbiz, and basically running the family bank, where he's sort of henpecked by his fiancée, he's henpecked by his mum, and he wants to get out, he wants to get onto the stage. But his mum sends him out to Dead Rock, Nevada, where on behalf of the bank, he needs to go and foreclose on the local theatre because they've defaulted on their mortgage. Of course, when he gets there, it's not quite so simple. He falls hard for the theatre owner's daughter.
Who is the only woman in town.
The only woman in town. Yes. And then he sets up an alternative plan to put on a show and save the theatre.
Yeah, the show he's auditioned for is on a break in New York, and he thinks he can get all the showgirls out there and, save the theatre and save the town by putting on a musical. A fairly bleak titter ran round the theatre people in the audience at this rather frankly fantastical economic idea. I don't think anyone would think that was a sound way of going about things these days. But
end up closing the rest of the town as
exactly. Well. Yes, quite. Yes, but I mean the plot really shouldn't bother one too much here, really, is it? I don't think that's the main thing.
This is sort of the archetypal Broadway musical, isn't it, in a way? It's a screwball comedy, it's a romance, but above all else, it's pure spectacle.
Yeah, it's tap dancing, and tap dancing is absolutely irresistible. I always know if I'm going to go and see a show where there's a chorus line and they're going to be thundering down the stage at me that I'm probably going to have a good time.
Yeah.
This shares quite a lot of DNA with 42nd Street, which was also recently on, which was also adapted from a 1930s film. That production didn't quite work for me, but still the tap dancing was sublime. Here, this show fires on all cylinders.
Absolutely.
It's really, really great. It's really charming. It's really funny. The dance is really innovative and classic at the same time.
And it's not just tap dancing, which I agree is amazing, but it's just the sheer choreography, the amazing choreography, the energy that comes off it. I was sitting there thinking the joy of seeing top professionals all in sync doing something at the top of their game. It's just absolutely joyous.
It is. And yes, hats off to Susan Stroman here. Some of it is really swoonsome, the choreography, isn't it? The sort of dips and swoops and swirls of it. But there's also very, very smart, clever things. This is an old mining town, Dead Rock, which has become defunct. And so there's a dance routine which revolves around prospecting pans and pickaxes, which is just extraordinary.
Yes.
And, very, very, very tight, very disciplined.
Absolutely.
Really brilliantly done. I think it's fascinating the way that American culture constantly cannibalizes itself. There's so many musicals about putting on musicals, and so many that particularly hark back to this sort of 1930s heyday, which, if one thinks about it, was slap bang in the middle of the Great Depression. So Girl Crazy was released in 1930, and it is about these sort of Ziegfeld Follies style shows, which are all froth and exuberance and enjoyment, and I think are a distraction from harsh economic reality. And
Absolutely.
I think So Crazy for You is really ripe for our current times, isn't it?
Yeah,
really?
and it is that pure glamour, and then the Follies girls. It's just an extraordinary star. And but also, as we said, being said in the 1930s, it also is pre-Hays Code.
Yes.
So there is a bit of, should we say, close to the knuckle banter.
There's a bit of looseness in there, isn't there? Yes, I think, yes.
It's fairly straightforward and fairly sweet, really. But every now and then there's a little interaction where, should we say, well, there's the fiancé and the love interest when they really get going at each other. There are some choice lines.
There are some choice lines. I think the fiancé is told that the love interest, Polly, is the only woman in town, and she says, well, no wonder she looks so tired. So there are those sort of things. There's also, I think there's some quite clever nods to other bits of 1930s culture. One of the things that Bobby Child does, because when Polly finds out that he comes from the bank, she wants nothing to do with him. So he disguises himself as Bella Zangler, this Hungarian impresario who he's been trying to audition for before. She falls in love with the fake Bella Zangler. Then, of course, the real Bella Zangler turns up. And then we have a scene where the two Bella Zanglers interact together. And if you know the Marx Brothers mirror scene, it's a pure brilliant sort of riff on that. And it's absolutely hilariously done.
That's sort of great stagecraft. Again, it shows off all sorts of different, from comedy to obviously the great choreography. But this, again, brilliant comic choreography. And brilliant drunk acting and dancing from them. It's a very, very hard thing to do, to act as if you're not in control of your body. And, it is. We should talk about the cast. I mean, Charlie Stemp, who's sort of something of a rising musical star. I mean, he's a very established musical star, actually, but he is a solid name in the West End.
He became a sort of, in a way, it sort of fits perfectly with this show, and again with 42nd Street, which is also partly the idea behind these shows, I think, is the American dream that anyone can be a star. That a lot of here, Bobby recruits a lot of the townsfolk, and indeed Polly turns out to be a wonderful musical actress and stage performer, so she becomes the star of the show, blah, blah, blah. It's all very self-referential, and I think it is all tied into that idea that anybody can make it in America. It's open to everyone. And this is what happened to Charlie Stemp in 2016. He was hired by Cameron Mackintosh to appear in a revival of Half a Sixpence, which I think is a musical that nobody was crying out for. It's an old Tommy Steele vehicle, I think. But he absolutely wowed everybody in that. I didn't actually see that production. He then played Bert, the chimney sweep, in the revival of Mary Poppins, and was incredible in that. I mean, he and Carly Anderson as Polly Baker seem almost weightless in this, or they seem as if they're operating on a different system of gravity.
There was some real La La Land stuff, wasn't there? When the stars would come out behind them and the arms would flow.
But they do seem to float, don't they?
Yeah, they absolutely do.
They really do.
And actually, I think the dancing was where they really were at their most magnificent. I mean, I thought Charlie Stemp was superb. I thought in the performance was perhaps over-mannered every now and again. The sort of gurning musicalness of it all occasionally got a bit too much. I mean, it was very rare. It's, I don't want to pick too many holes because I thought it was a wonderful production. But where they really come to their own is singing and dancing.
I totally agree. Carly Anderson has a really strong voice, I think, very, very, very sort of clear and sonorous. She's wonderful. Natalie Kasanga, I loved as Irene, the fiancée, who is a sort of spare part. She sort of hangs around for no very clear reason, except that she's given this wonderful Gershwin song "Naughty Baby" to sing, which is very sort of naughty, without ever being explicit or specific. It's a very sort of hot under the collar song, isn't it? And she sings it absolutely wonderfully.
Yes, she's great, and we also got to give a shout out to Tom Eden, who listeners may remember from his amazing turn in One Man, Two Governors, where he played the waiter who fell down the stairs.
Yes.
And he brings some more of these comic chops to this character as well. As Bella Zangler.
He's great. He's got a wonderful sort of hollow-eyed, slightly desperate, sweaty look to him, hasn't he, Tom Eden? And it absolutely fits perfectly with this part.
And you mentioned the songs. It's funny, came to the show completely cold. I didn't know what was going to be in it, and the ones that I knew were Someone to Watch Over Me, I think that Frank Sinatra did later on, and also the classic I Got Rhythm, which has a brilliant scene it's superbly choreographed. And the one that I didn't know that I really enjoyed was Slap That Bass, which
that's
was
terrific.
a joyous
that's a lovely sort of that starts the sort of slide into the interval, doesn't it, with
absolutely
4 numbers of absolutely rafter rattling stuff. They've got Nice Work If You Can Get It in this as well. They Can't Take That Away From Me, which is such a beautiful song. I mean, the Gershwins didn't ever write a duff number, I think, did they really? And it was very shrewd of the Broadway producers, Ockrent and and now Strowman again to basically corral them all in this one show. It's just a delight, isn't it? It's a proper diversion from all the concerns.
Yeah, I mean, I was there on a Monday evening. It was a slow start to my week, and it properly lifted me out of the doldrums. I loved it.
Yeah. I mean, this and say Anything Goes, which reopened the Barbican after lockdown. Again, another sort of frothy delight. Plot makes no sense, doesn't matter.
Everyone kicking in unison.
Exactly.
That's all you need.
Yeah, as we say, a chorus line advancing down the stage at you like an android army.
Yeah. So listeners, go out.
Pack up your troubles.
Yeah.
Yes, exactly. And it's fitting that Crazy View is on at the Gillian Lynn Theatre, which is the first major London theatre to be named after a choreographer. It's just lovely.
Right, time for a quick break. Stick around to hear Nick Curtis chat to Cherrelle Skeete about her new play, Beneatha's Place, now on at the Young Vic.
I'm Millie Alcock, and you're listening to the Evening Standard Theatre Podcast.
This week, joining me down the line is Cherrelle Skeete, the star of Beneatha's Place at the Young Vic. So, would you mind telling the listeners what Beneatha's Place is about?
So we first meet Beneatha in 1959, which is pre-independence Nigeria. We're in Lagos. She has literally just not long come back from her living in Chicago in America, as we've just left her in A Raisin in the Sun. And she's newly married with her husband, Asagai, and she's come to Nigeria to be part of the movement of independence as a medical student, as a young doctor, to help out, to be of service, to be not only a wife, but also to be a comrade to her husband. Her husband, Asagai, played by Zachary Momo, is the party leader and diplomat of this independence party. So he would be seen as like the person that speaks on behalf of the party, that liaises with the British. He also is one of the leaders when there is like hostility. It's actually happening on his ancestral land. So he has a responsibility not only to the party, but also his community. He cares very deeply about his community. In the second act, we then meet Beneatha as a dean, as a very well respected and revered academic within her field of social anthropology, within the social sciences, and she has a faculty meeting, and rather than having it on the university premises or at the conference premises, she chooses to revisit the home that she set up with her husband, that she hasn't been there for 50 years. So she has this faculty meeting in her place, basically, that has been kept as almost like a tomb, that she's been, I suppose, supporting from a distance whilst she's been working in America, putting her work into academia.
This play is written by Kwame Kwei-Armah, the artistic director of the Young Vic, which is where it's on. It's sort of a sequel to A Raisin in the Sun, isn't it? But also, to some degree, a response to Bruce Norris's play Clibborn Park, which was itself a response to A Raisin in the Sun. Is that right?
Yeah, so this mounting of the play, it was originally, I suppose, a clapback to Clibborn Park and Kwame's response to that piece. But as we've revisited it in this rehearsal period, we've really made it as a standalone piece. It's a piece that is accessible within 2023. Obviously, that was, 2012, I think, when it was first written, and was done in the States, where this time we're looking at post-lockdown. We've all had the experience of watching George Floyd being murdered. And how does social sciences, how does academia respond to the lockdown that we've just had? And I think it's a really brilliant piece that kind of shines a light on so many different arguments that, as we say in the play, it's not so much black and white. It's actually just hearing the arguments laid out. And I think the first half really centres around the root of where it comes from, which is the search for identity, which Beneatha, that's what brings her to Nigeria, her search for identity and reclaiming of her identity as an African, but having the experience of being African American and then bringing that knowledge to the States.
It addresses a sort of a movement, particularly on the right wing of politics, and particularly over the last few years, that this idea that we should somehow be moving towards a sort of post-racialism, that we're past addressing race, aren't we? Or that somehow it's too difficult to speak about. How is that to play on stage, and what are the reactions you're getting from the audience?
I think what's been interesting is having discussions with all different types of people once we come off stage. I think the Americans get it straight away. There's a whole nother layer that they experience. I think we are a lot further behind in this country, how we speak about race. I think the Americans are a lot more further ahead in regards to, first of all, understanding and seeing what's happening around them and then being in response to it. So everyone has an opinion about things. I think it's very difficult to even have a full opinion about things when we aren't, we don't even properly know our history here. We don't even fully understand what has happened, during colonial times, or even which countries are still under colonial rule, or we don't know. I feel like because a lot of stuff happened in America that was on the land, it's right in front of people to be able to understand it. They understand where the money comes from. They know where their money has come from. They know that this ancestor and this ancestor was picking cotton, and that they know where they've travelled from in terms of migration, and how, Beneatha represents that. She knows that her parents travelled from the south to come to Chicago for a better life, that her family would have been sharecroppers, and before that her family would have been enslaved African people. In this country, being, I'm of Caribbean descent, there is a big chunk of history that is missing that I myself do not know, because it has been wiped. Because a lot of my ancestors who came from the Caribbean, there is a wiping of history. So before we can even have the full conversation that we need to have and continue to keep having about race and how, as a construct, how it is holding us back as a people, we have to be able to understand our history. That's the difference, I think, between the Americans and the Brits. And that's why it sits so uncomfortable. I think even more uncomfortable here, because it does something on a cellular level that we haven't been able to fully communicate just yet. I think the conversations are happening, I think, within academia and academic spaces and debates and things like that. But in terms of how it trickles down into, I suppose, for everybody to have the conversation, it's not quite happening just yet.
In the play, as you say, Beneatha has to age about 64 years, doesn't she, between the first and second half. Tell me how that is to achieve.
First of all, I'd like to shout out Shelley Maxwell, who's a wonderful movement director, artist, dancer herself, and she supported me on this process. I come from a dance background, so for me it's a physical challenge, and it's also exciting for me to be able to age up, I suppose, and to have had the gift of the first half and to then carry that into the second half and adding layers of years through body. It's been fun and challenging, and for me, I just think of the older generations above me who have been weathering the storm, and for me, I get to honour those women every time I get to step on stage as older Beneatha, who's very proud, who's dignified, but she's been carrying a whole community with her for decades and decades, and that shows on the body in different ways. It was nerve-wracking and exciting all at the same time.
I know on your website you say you've got a particular interest in sort of devised or collaborative theatre, but you've also been involved in a couple of entertainment juggernauts. I'm particularly thinking of Harry Potter, where you played a junior Weasley Granger, didn't you? How was that to be part of?
Yeah, so I had the great good fortune of originating Rose Granger Weasley, with Noma Dumaswini playing my mother as Hermione Granger. She's incredible and a dear friend. And that was amazing to, first of all, be part of the creative process of creating a lot of the magic. Like, the very early magic tricks that we created was in our devising process, the movement we got to make, the incredible movement by Stephen Hoggett, and all the incredible creative team. It was like bare bones, like stripped back before we then were able to put it into the space, carrying people on our backs to kind of figure out how we can lift people, like, being in harnesses and flying. And those earlier days in the process was amazing. And then obviously then being able to share the show with an audience was like a whole another whirlwind within itself. What was amazing about that was seeing like a whole another generation of people that hadn't necessarily been to the theatre. They came to the theatre because they loved the books. And that's what brought them to the theatre. And there's actually like a little fan club of Cursed Child fan club theatre members who would come, like, I think they'd watch the show like 100 times, and they all keep tabs on a lot of the original cast, and they come out and watch us. So when we had our press night, and I know a lot of the other previous cast members in Harry Potter and the Cursed Child, they come and watch some of our shows. So it's amazing. There is a whole new generation of theatre goers now because of that show that weren't necessarily interested in theatre.
Just briefly, tell me a little bit about Blacktress, which you set up.
So Blacktress has been going since 2017. We centre the voices of Black women actors. I would say that we are a group that is rooted solely in community. We also have gone into producing work as well. So we have socials, workshops. We do fundraisers for the community. We do collaborations with theatres and ticket discounts to make sure that we're bringing in people who are, not only Black women, but people of the community who wouldn't necessarily come and take up space within theatre. One of our proud projects that we're really proud of is collaborating with the National Theatre on a project called the Sage Club. And we brought in some elders from the African and Caribbean community, where we had 70 to 100 tickets given, discounted tickets for elders over 65 and their chaperones to come and watch Small Island. This was the first mounting. And then we had Maya Jeffers, who was an incredible award-winning portrait photographer and a dear friend, who took pictures of them on the day. So they got VIP treatment on the day, and they also got to meet the cast members. And that was great just to see elders who were part of the Windrush generation to be able to watch Small Island in the National Theatre. That was really, really important. So we do projects like that, where we're bringing in community. We're also getting volunteers from the community to be involved, fundraising for Women's Refuge, fundraising for the Sickle Cell Society, hosting screenings of films, and also going into drama schools as well.
Cherrelle Skeete, thank you ever so much for joining me on the Evening Standard Theatre podcast. We should say that Beneatha's Place runs to the 5th of August at the Young Vic.
Thank you so much, Nick. Take care.
That was Nick Curtis speaking to actress Cherrelle Skeete. After this quick break, we'll be discussing A Strange Loop at the Barbican. In the meantime, why not give us a follow and a 5-star rating?
I'm Tim Minchin. I'm the composer-lyricist of Groundhog Day the Musical, and you are listening to the Evening Standard Theatre Podcast.
Welcome back to the podcast. Now, it's time to chat about A Strange Loop. This is a musical by Michael R. Jackson, who was just on the podcast a couple of weeks ago, and that interview is available in our show notes. But I have not seen this, unfortunately. So, Nick, what did you think?
Well, I went and caught up on it last night. It was reviewed for the paper by Tim Bano while I was away in Denmark. This meant that I went in there aware that the show had divided not only critics but also friends of mine pretty much down the middle. I mean, this is a real Marmite event, I think, in London theatre.
A friend of mine said that it starts off fairly strongly with a rather, should we say, punchy opening, and there was some wincing from the older members of the audience.
We should tell people, we've said it's a Broadway musical. It won 2 Tonys and it won the Pulitzer Prize for Michael R. Jackson. It is the story of an usher who is called Usher, who is a fat black gay man who is an usher at the Lion King. And he's writing a musical about a fat gay black man who is an usher at the Lion King, who is writing a musical about a fat black gay man. And
very
so on,
meta.
And so on, very meta.
And this is the Strange Loop.
This is one of the strange loops in it. A strange loop is I think a sort of medical psychological term about repetitive behaviour and about basically ending up where you started. Indulging in behaviours that bring you back to square one, as it were. And so there's quite a lot of that in that. It's very clever in the way it uses repetition, but it's also very repetitive in the way it uses repetition. And there are moments when you think, oh, come on, do something different.
Is this sort of Groundhog Day style?
Yeah, it's sort of Groundhog Day style, except, it's I found the show a mixture of the absolutely exciting and breathtaking and really quite audacious and really, really exasperating. I mean, I have to say, one of the things that I really do dislike in the theatre is writing about how awful it is to be a writer. You just think, well, stop writing that. That said, I mean, this one is a more sophisticated example of that genre. I think Michael R. Jackson now prefers not to call it an autobiographical show. He says when he started writing it as a monologue years ago, I think over a decade ago, he acknowledges that was very much an autobiographical story about his life and about his lack of self-esteem and his lack of advancement in the industry. Now he sort of says it's sort of self-referential, I think, rather than autobiographical. I think that was the term he used when Nancy interviewed him for the podcast the other week. It's quite sort of audacious in its staging in that it's really quite simple, actually. It starts with two sets of doorways in which various actors playing his inner thoughts step through. One of them introduces himself and says, "Hey, Michael, it's me. It's your daily self-loathing here, just to remind you that you're an awful person." I think they use a slightly different version, a slightly different wording to that. And these actors also play versions, quite cartoonish versions of his parents and other family members, his agent, the various people he comes across in life, the people he meets when he tries dating disastrously online. Right. Some critics who come from perhaps the more reactionary side of the spectrum have taken issue with the subject matter. Yep. But the music is good.
Well, I was going to ask you about is extraordinary. The tunes. Would you come out with humming the tunes?
Yeah, I mean, there's a huge amount of variety in it. I think there's a lot of references to American culture in here, particularly to the career of Tyler Perry, who is the his sort of nemesis, or almost the sort of antichrist as far as he's concerned.
Yes, who's massive in the States.
Yeah, and who writes these sort of immensely popular films and stage shows, which quite often involve cross-dressing and quite often involve a Christian message. Here, Usher's parents, they live this sort of fairly horrible, imperfect life where his dad's an alcoholic and his mum's overweight, and his older brother lives in the basement with his baby mama who sort of hates him. And, but they love Usher, but they can't get their heads around his lifestyle. Right. So he's constantly trying to explain to them what being him means, and they are constantly not understanding. Again, it's another strange loop that they keep coming back to the same positions over and over again in the show.
I mean, it's only, I think, an hour and 40 minutes straight through, but it sounds like there's an awful lot packed in here.
There is an awful lot packed in here, and it's extremely clever and complicated and thoughtful. Some of the reviews seem to suggest that this was just some vulgar thing that's been slapped on the stage, but it's not. It's taken years to hone and craft, and there's some really deep thinking in there and some very, very challenging ideas.
And does it translate to, because it was seen as a very American show.
Yeah, I think.
Does it translate to the British audience?
I think the themes are universal. Yeah. The cultural touchstones are not. So Popeye's Chicken and Tyler Perry are not as familiar here as they are over there. And I think also the fact that Usher is working on a Disney show, he's working on The Lion King as an usher, that has a different significance in America, working for Disney and knowing what that means, the sort of uniformity of it and the strictness of it. All his family are referred to by the names of the characters in The Lion King. So his dad's called Mufasa. Right. His brother's girlfriend is called Rafiki.
They booked it into the Barbican Theatre for quite a long run for that space. Yeah. Obviously hoping that it would find a British audience. Now, it sounds like there should be a British audience for it because there is so much in here.
As Michael R. Jackson said to Nancy when she spoke to him on the podcast, I think she said to him she wasn't surprised that there was an audience for it here because there very clearly is. People are crying out for stuff that isn't white, straight and boring. But she was surprised that commercial producers were prepared to take that leap. Yeah. And I think all credit to them for doing so.
Absolutely.
It's directed by the New York director Stephen Brackett, and it's choreographed by Raja Feather Kelly. Compared to Crazy for You, this is not tap dancing and big chorus line numbers. This is very sort of close, tight, intricately weaving choreography. Again, it's a strange loop. The characters are always circling Usher and sort of tying him up in his own anxieties.
And I've heard very good things about the actor playing Usher.
Yeah, Kyle Raymar Freeman. He's extraordinary. He was, I gather, the understudy on Broadway, but went on more than 100 times, I believe. Strange Loop, I think, opened fairly soon after COVID, and I think there was quite a lot of illness racketing around the cast. So he's well-versed in the role. He is extraordinary. He has this very high, very very powerful voice.
Well, I haven't seen it, but I have to say it sounds like one of the most intriguing musicals or just theatrical productions of the year, so I'm pretty keen to go out and see it.
I mean, compared to, I see some new musicals that are out there which don't have a fraction of this show's sort of intellectual heft or radicalism, or as I say, thoughtfulness.
I'm certainly sold, so I will be heading to the Barbican Theatre as soon as possible to see that.
You won't be bored.
And that's it for this week's Theatre Podcast. You can find all our previous interviews below, such as with Michael R. Jackson, the creator of A Strange Loop, but also with Millie Alcock and Caitlin Fitzgerald in The Crucible, and Danny Rigby for Accidental Death of an Anarchist, and many, many more.
You can also find all our reviews fresh from press night and news online at standard.co.uk. Don't forget to subscribe so you never miss a new episode, and thanks as always to our producer Rachel Abbott.
See you soon.